Okay, so like once again, we're at the Bowen Bay Water System Community Information Meeting. And Patrick Graham, Director of Engineering. Please share your presentation.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. Since we last met with this community in July, we at that time we met with the Blue Water and King Edward Bay communities as well. Before committing to the project and the expenditures associated with it, the Blue Water community requested more information. We brought more information and some updates to October 26th meeting with the Blue Water community. Shared that with the King Edward Bay community on November 1st. Then we met with the Blue Water community, the Blue Water LAC again that week, and did get some endorsement from them in terms of the path forward and the expenditures that would be required. And so I'll go through more or less the same presentation, go through a bit quicker than I did with the Blue Water community, but if there's something you want me to explain more fully, don't hesitate to chime in. And I have updated it in terms of the next steps because there has been some advancement to the project and some events that are relevant since the October 26th meeting. So with that, I'll just share my screen. So it's working here. As we know, the big driver for the improvements needed are the gap between the supply and the demand in the Blue Water Park service area. As we talked about in July and previously to that, the most cost-effective approach is to upgrade the Bowen Bay wells and interconnect the systems. We did have some discussion and some concern raised by this group, as well as King Edward Bay, about the risk of water main leaks. So we have looked at the water mains in Blue Water Park in more detail in terms of where the highest risks are to the groundwater resources. And we have to recognize the limitations on the community's ability to pay and look at where we can spend the money for the greatest benefits and to mitigate the most important risks. So looking at the basic picture of supply and demand, Blue Water has a much bigger demand than supply. Bowen Bay and to some extent King Edward Bay as well have significantly more supply than demand. And with the Bowen Bay wells in particular, there's capacity to the sustainable yield of those wells is substantially higher than what the current pumping equipment can deliver. Oops, sorry. So that's really the basis for the preferred approach and preferred solution, which would be to optimize the existing wells. Dennis?
Yeah, just a question about the additional capacity with upgraded wells. Do we really know that our wells can provide that level of water? You know, when I looked at the urban, whatever that company's name is, study, they didn't present that in such definitive terms. So I'm just curious, do we know that that's doable and sustainable, more importantly, without affecting the aquifer adversely?
Yeah, well, and that is why we did the comprehensive aquifer study, which included monitoring of all the wells and all of the wells in the three systems, as well as some adjacent areas. And the hydrogeologists' recommendations were, pretty clearly showing that there's substantially more sustainable yield in the three Bowen Bay wells, particularly well one. That was done in 2020 primarily. In 2021, we did go back and take another look at the conclusions and recommendations from that study based on more recent data that we've had from this summer, as well as operational experience. And so based on the recommendations from Matthew Munn, hydrogeologist and urban systems, we are confident in the ability of these wells to sustainably deliver substantially more than what the current.
A related question, if I may, are we going to have some monitoring system for the level of the aquifer installed? It's stuck in my mind that we were talking about doing that a year or so ago. So
we do have monitoring in all of the wells, and we will continue to monitor levels. I did notice that the Bowen Bay wells aren't linked to SCADA, which we intend to do, so we can access that information more easily. But ongoing monitoring of all the municipal wells is an important part of this program.
But the level of the water, not just the pumping rate.
Yes, the water level in the wells.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I wonder if I might ask a question regarding the aquifer study. How did they go about determining their the future needs relative to the study as it describes it, the confidence in future needs?
In terms of the future demand relative to existing?
Yes, and perhaps relative to the numbers of people.
Yeah, there were some assumptions made about future demand. So it was assumed that the average demand per property would increase based on a few things. One would be climate change, so hotter summers tend to be more irrigation. There was an assumption made that there might be more secondary suites. And then it was also assumed that the properties that are large enough and zoned to be able to be subdivided could potentially happen. And so based on these assumptions, I'd have to go back to it's laid out in the report, the assumed current demand versus future, and so it was probably about 30% more assumed in future, but it was based on some assumptions of what could happen to increase demand within the service areas.
Yeah, if I may, I just wonder if that includes development, especially as it may relate to other draws in the future and the zoning systems that are presently in place regarding things like the Budas Ridge coming in as well.
It did assume full build out of our Budas Ridge. So currently the third phase 3 is underway, and there's a phase 4 which would include the construction of a new reservoir, of a new high zone reservoir. So yeah, full build out of our Budas Ridge, and the scenario, really the only large subdividable property is the Menzies property in Blue Water. And so the scenario, it did look at scenarios where if that property were developed, there may need to be additional supply provided.
No, he's showing us
and
this.
that would certainly be a requirement of any kind of development proposal, of that scale, to show that substantial,
I have a question if I
adequate
may ask.
What's that?
Yes, it's Jim Taylor here.
I'd like to, the definitive way that you've mapped out the aquifers, is that a best guess scenario, or is it, I mean, based on real hard science?
Well, it's based on monitoring of the wells and test pumping to determine whether pumping in one well affects another. It's the aquifer, it's all mapped as one aquifer, but it's really an interconnected network of water-bearing fractures. And
Yes,
so they one well, may or may not intercept the same fractures as another well.
I understand that. And my question is when we see that in a map or in a presentation, it looks like this lake and that lake, and that's not true. I don't think it's true.
Well, what we do, what the aquifer study looked at was, various points in space, right? All of the wells that we have, monitoring what's happening in those wells. And based on that, and based on the expertise and experience of the hydrogeologists, they make some, assumptions about what's going on overall. Just like any hydrogeological or geotechnical study, right? That's based on, you take a
To
snapshot
Dennis
based on some
Vetter's
holes in the
point,
ground.
To Dennis Vetter's
Dave.
point, we don't know if this is going to be actually sustainable, the pump the water out of Bowen Bay system.
Well, we do. I mean, that was the whole
We
point.
do?
Yes, yeah, that was the whole point of doing the comprehensive study of the wells and the aquifers.
So if it doesn't happen, what's going to, if we cannot produce this water for the west side, what's going to happen?
Well, we can, and that's the whole point.
Graham, do you have a question?
Pardon?
Yeah,
Sorry,
sorry,
Jim, I'm gonna give
sorry,
Graham a
Patrick,
chance.
you're in the hot seat here, Patrick. Yeah, thanks for clicking on. So sorry, I think it's worth noting that here, Blue Water is completely reliant on water supply from King Edward Bay. King Edward Bay, in terms of the history of the west side of Bowen, is relatively new. So is this saying that if King Edward Bay, if that development didn't happen, which it took a long time to get developed, what would Blue Water be doing now if they didn't have King Edward Bay's water?
Well, they wouldn't have any. They.
So, I think it's a fair point, right? So if we're looking longer term here, to more to Jim Taylor's point around the aquifer as well too.
Yeah, I mean, all we can do is look at the wells that we have, get the right professionals involved to monitor those wells over a year-long period, do some testing of the wells to determine what sort of response they have, what sort of recharge characteristics they exhibit, and provide their professional recommendations on what is the best approach to providing water for this population. It's possible there could, and we're getting into subsequent slides, but that's fine. I mean, it's possible that somewhere on the Menzies property there would be good well development potential. That would require substantial exploration and investigation, and it could possibly result in. So to go back to the question, if King Edward Bay never happened, perhaps 5-10 years ago there would have been a lot invested in further exploration, and other solutions would have been found. I don't know. I mean, that's a sort of an alternate scenario, alternate reality. But we do see that the wells further south are substantially more productive. There was, in response to some water crisis in water supply crisis in Blue Water, there was some well development activity that didn't result in what what was hoped for. And part of the reason for that is that it was not based on comprehensive and detailed studies of the well characteristics and the aquifer characteristics with the qualified professionals that we need to have involved to give us the right advice. So that's really where do we know anything 100%? I mean, it's hard to really answer that question definitively, but this is the best. This is our best bet, and that's based on an extensive amount of work and some advice from professional engineers and hydrogeologists that we have confidence in. I'm not sure what more assurance I can provide than that.
Thank you, Patrick.
So if we want to carry on here, the basis is the balance of supply and available demand. Just looking at the current sources of water to blue water, and it is, as particularly when we get into the summer, substantially reliant on water supply from King Edward Bay, which is the orange part of the bars. The other aspect here is that really it's only King Edward Bay that has a reservoir that has large enough capacity to provide proper deliver proper fire flows and to provide the kind of buffer that we would like to have for emergencies and to buffer like peak time demands. So that is really a big benefit to the Bowen Bay system of this approach, is that you will have access to this reservoir, and you don't really fully realize the benefits to that until the water mains are upgraded to actually deliver the flows you need for fire protection. But I think that's important to remember. We did look at some data from the past summer, and as I mentioned, we're updating the aquifer study and well optimization reports based on that. And essentially the King Edward Bay reservoir the King Edward Bay wells weren't able to meet the demand of King Edward Bay and blue water, which is why we need the Bowen Bay wells to be brought online. There was a last summer, which the summer before.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do we know actually what the leakage is in blue water?
There was a leak in the summer of 2022.
Generally, the consumption is what it is. It's not leaks.
It's primarily consumption. Yeah.
Okay.
And I do have a slide on that will hopefully help clarify for you.
Thanks, Jim.
I just want to say one last thing here, is that I don't have a problem with the surveys, the geological and aquifer surveys. I think it's a best guess scenario, but I hate to think that we'd be going down a road that we're locked into this from Bowen Bay's perspective.
Okay. Just looking at the King Edward Bay tank from the summer before, when we did have a very hot period, and about the end of June, where the reservoir level got quite low, is when the Arbutus Ridge well was brought online, and that really helped the situation. So that's another very productive well. So in general, we're talking about well supply upgrades as being the key component of the first phase, and replacing some of the priority water mains in blue water. And then a subsequent phase of replacing the remaining mains, the remaining old mains, ultimately constructing a new reservoir tank. And then eventually the entire system would need to be replaced. So essentially
But this is a Bowen Bay meeting.
yeah, so I'm just going to go over this more quickly.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, this is the presentation on the Blue Water Improvements project. And it's affecting this community. So we're going through it with you as well. So in terms of the additional well supply needed, it's the 3 Bowen Bay wells would be upgraded with higher power pumps that are capable of pumping up to the King Edward Bay Reservoir. There would need to be a new fill line installed from the Bowen Bay wells up to the chlorination building just off of Windjammer Road at Joan Audrey. And then that would tie into the existing fill line so that water could be pumped from the Bowen Bay wells to the King Edward Bay Reservoir. And that all 3 systems would be serviced from there. There's also some opportunity to upgrade one of the wells in Blue Water to supplement the supply as well. And when I showed the bulk of the project would be funded by Blue Water Park through long-term borrowing. So we would need to do a community referendum to authorize the borrowing. And I've shown the contribution from Bowen Bay essentially based on the like-for-like replacement costs so the capital replacement component, what it would be to just replace the wells with like-for-like, and something that's a coastal health requirement is developing wellhead protection plans. That's something that we should be doing in any case.
So can you clarify this for me? What is the cost to Bowen Bay to get this water to Blue Water?
The cost to Bowen Bay.
Yes.
So for the well upgrades of the 690,000 estimated cost, 40,000.
Our cost is 40,000.
That's the estimate. Yeah.
You want to go back to that
So
slide?
why should we be paying this money at all?
Well, you are getting some benefit from this project. As I mentioned, you're getting access to the King Edward Bay Reservoir. Right now, you have
Yes,
very small.
okay, that's fine. I understand that.
Okay, and then it's also, and we'll get to this in more detail a little later, but the current pumps one of them has failed and needs to be replaced in any case. And so we'll get to that option later with the LAC. I mean, we could just replace it like for like. Our preference would be to put the money we would have spent on that towards this project, and that would be part of the 40,000. That's for well 1. Wells 2 and 3 are similar age. They are going to need to be replaced, and that would be a Bowen Bay cost. Bowen Bay does need to, as do all of the systems, develop wellhead protection plans. So there's a cost to that. So these are costs related to strictly capital replacement of the system, and developing, the plans that we need for groundwater protection. So that's what that Bowen Bay.
I'm going to put you on the spot, not as an engineer. It's just a question here. It's like, we understand that legally we don't own the Bowen Bay water system anymore. We know that. But ethically and politically, we still do.
Well, this is why.
So my question to you and everybody else is, we're doing all right here.
Mhm.
We're not trying to be mean or nasty. But if you look at Blue Water, let's say the cost of a house there, property is about $1 million. It's going to cost them $30,000 to get a guaranteed water system. So the cost has gone up 3%. if they don't have a guaranteed water system, I don't know how much the value of their housings are going to go down. I say it's going to be appreciably, like 20, 50%. So we're gambling here. Bowen Bay is gambling on good faith that there's enough water here to do this, and they're going to profiteer out of it. That's what I see. Very financial question. Mean and nasty, I know.
They are, yeah, they are paying for the upgrades.
They're paying for the upgrade, but they don't have anything right now. So it's like if you're on a boat, you don't have any water, you'll pay anything to get some water.
So I'm
Yeah,
not sure. what
it's
we said.
Allison here. Maybe we could let Patrick finish his presentation and then we can
Yeah.
get into some of this debating.
Yeah, I understand, Patrick, it's not your problem. I understand that totally. But I just going, you got to start airing these things because we can just get lost in the details. Thank you, Allison.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Want to carry on, Patrick?
All right, just to make a comment on, other well supply options. I'm not saying we won't have to develop new wells in the future. I mean, that's very much a scenario that's likely. The most likely area, if looking at Blue Water Park as a standalone system, that Menzies property is probably the best bet, and that's the advice we had from the hydrogeologists. There's no guarantees of new well capacity, whereas with our existing wells, we're able to test them extensively and assess them and study the wells and the aquifers and have a much higher level of confidence about what they can deliver. So we expect that this would be substantially higher risk and more costly than the proposed approach.
I have a question about the water line up to from the Bowen Bay to the tank. It's following the roads, and I understand that's reasonable way to look at it. But if you actually look at the map, it's about the distance is about a third if you just go overland directly. Is there any consideration given to that?
Yeah, overland would.
I think it is.
I mean, it would
probably
be
a private property to have to cross, but
yeah, there's private property. There's you'd be going sort of through forested areas. It's very steep slopes as well.
not necessarily, sir. When you actually look at the contours, you go up to the cul-de-sac, the last cul-de-sac, it's very flat.
Well, and the other thing is that you're only installing a new line along the first 40% here, and then tying
When
into
it brings going up the hill with it.
well, this is an existing fill line.
Okay, I didn't understand that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's just the pink line here,
Okay.
and that's similar. Actually, it's probably even shorter than the direct line.
Okay.
Which is,
Thank you. I appreciate the clarification.
We did also look at, and this is looking up at where the King Edward Bay tank is there, the Arbutus Ridge development.
Yeah.
There is a well on the Stewart property, Ian Stewart's property next to the Arbutus Ridge development that has a well that he's brought, he's open to dedicating as a municipal well. As part of the Arbutus Ridge development, we're having the right of ways and fill line installed that would allow this well to potentially in future be brought online. So it's another potential source there. And, in terms of surface supply options, really the catchment, Grafton Lake would be the only surface water that's more reliable than the groundwater options in this part of the island. I won't get into this in detail. We talked in detail about the water mains in Blue Water. I just wanted to point out that it's not that there's major leaks all the time. There was a leak in June of this year that was along Windjammer that was resolved, and then there was the leak that people are familiar with that occurred in 2019. most of the other leaks that we've had have been much smaller and on the service lines typically. So we don't have a lot of water main leaks. There is a risk of the older the mains and the other factors relating to the type of material that was used, thinner wall pipe in some cases. We've proposed replacing the highest priority mains as part of this first phase and having a plan developed to ensure that the remaining old mains are also replaced. Just looking at the leakage, this in 2022, in June, we had that leak that was discovered fairly and repaired fairly quickly. We did have I guess it was starting at some point in late 2018, there was a leakage into at the Spyglass ravine, and it took some time for that leak to be discovered and repaired, and so substantially more water can be lost in that case, and that's why we're proposing to replace the highest risk water mains. I won't get into the details of the water main replacements, but this is relevant for Bowen Bay as well. Bowen Bay doesn't have fire protection. Replacing the Bowen Bay mains with now having access to the King Edward Bay Reservoir would increase the level of service to the properties in Bowen Bay. Ultimately, a new reservoir tank near the site of the current tank is proposed. That would be a future phase, and that would be needed to get fire flows to the upper end of the Blue Water Park system. And then ongoing capital replacement. So asset management planning is something we're advancing across the municipality, Bowen Bay as well. So if I get into the next steps, advancing the design for the well upgrades and the priority water main replacements, we need a community referendum, Blue Water, to be able to borrow the money required, 1.6 million. We did put some effort into a memorandum of understanding between the three water systems and BIM. It would be nice to have that. I don't think it's essential to moving forward. We need to have multi-year budgets and funding strategies for the remaining improvements. Confirming water rates, which is a discussion that we started in July and will be continuing this evening and ongoing. Grant opportunities, if we can, we're always looking for grant opportunities. Also improving our capacity for emergency response. We're hoping to purchase an excavator that would allow us to respond more quickly when leaks are discovered, and potentially improved leak detection equipment.
Patrick, Dennis has a question.
Yeah, Dennis.
I'm going to unmute. You want to unmute yourself, Dennis?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
The MOU between three water systems and BIM not being essential, are you saying that you can and will move forward with phase one without an MOU and an agreement by, for instance, the Bowen Bay water system users?
That's not what I said. I mean, we are seeking endorsement from the water systems through these community meetings and LAC meetings. We did, when this was going back earlier in the year, when we had a presentation of the preliminary design report from the consultants with all three water systems, and coming out of that, there was a recommendation that the three chairs of the water systems and myself and our CAO Liam would work together to lay out guiding principles that we would all agree to, and that would form a memorandum of understanding We spent a fair bit of effort on that, and I don't think it was all wasted. I think we did actually have agreement on the guiding principles. It was derailed for, other reasons that, and, we decided to invest our time and effort into engaging directly with the communities. So, that.
Thank you.
Looking at, we really like to avoid running into problems next summer, which is likely if we don't have additional supply available for blue water. So the Blue Water LAC has endorsed expenditures from their reserves to advance the design and assessment work to ultimately implement the well upgrades. The implementation phase will require borrowing, and we'll be advancing a loan authorization bylaw to council at the earliest opportunity to get that process started. And it is critical to the long-term water supply of Blue Water. I mentioned earlier there has been failure of the Bowen Bay well number 1. It does need to be replaced. We're trying to get Precision Pumps to schedule a trip to the island to deal with some issues that we have, including this one. They have given us a quote, $13,000 for essentially like for like replacement and dealing with that. I mentioned earlier our preference would be to put this towards the completion of an upgraded well. The wells 1 and 2 typically can easily meet demand without restrictions. There was a prolonged dry period and we got into October, and they weren't able to meet.
I have a question here. What's the variable of just a replacement pump to an upgrade pump financially?
Oh, the upgrade is much more expensive. Yeah, the upgrading is, if I went back to this, it was estimated $260,000 to upgrade the 3 wells, and a lot of that is electrical upgrades.
$260,000
$260.
to upgrade 3 wells.
So it's obviously it's a lot cheaper to just
Yeah,
keep
because
the
just
existing
replace a pump is
arrangement.
like $20,000 max, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's 13,000 is the quote we got from
Yeah.
Precision. So we could proceed with that, and then we would upgrade the wells later and try and find another use for that. The well pump that was, sorry, there we go.
But there's
Yeah,
there's no
so
reason to upgrade the wells unless the line's in.
Well, installing the line would be part of the project. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You would
Thank you.
upgrade the well and install the line.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, it's a lot less than it's not a big portion of the overall project, but every little bit helps. So that would be our preference. We are targeting completion of the well upgrades and installation of fill line by next June. And
Assuming this would go ahead, I see that there was a 8-inch line penned in to go from bottom of Bowen Bay Hill to King Edward Bay. Is there a cost put to that line?
well, yeah, I'll get to that.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, if this pink line here,
Yeah.
if it's installed as its own, it's probably a 3-inch line. It's less cost effective than installing it in a common trench with a new water main. So there would be savings to the overall project if Bowen Bay agreed to proceed with installation of at least this 350-meter section of
Mhm.
upgraded main at the same time. And I'll just show, I did look at some cost estimates for that, which I'll show you. In terms of Bowen Bay improvements, and this was presented at the meeting in July. Phase 1 is the well upgrades, is mostly funded by Blue Water. Phase 2, ultimately replacing the existing water mains with new larger mains. There would be one new PRV needed as well. The pressures would be higher when supplied from the King Edward Bay tank. So overall cost of estimate of 1.8 million to replace the whole system. I was talking about that 300, it says 300, that 350-meter section along Windjammer that could be installed in a common trench with the fill line.
Yeah.
So it would be, 370,000 to install that in future, and it would be a bit less than that, 335, if it's completed now in conjunction with the fill line. And that's based on, taking the overall savings of doing these two lines in the common trench and applying similar savings to, the Bowen Bay.
So am I correct in assuming the difference, the variable between the two costs there of that 350-meter line is splitting the difference? Like we would be paying a little less, and so would Blue Water. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
I don't understand that. I'm going, they're getting something, we're paying for something, they're getting something. I understand, but I don't agree with it.
Well, okay. I hope you can understand the rationale. I'm just trying to be.
I can, but I don't agree with it.
Okay.
Patrick, can I ask you a question, a simple one?
Yep.
Very easy. It's quite obvious that there's a lot of need, and there's a lot of time you've taken in looking at a lot of the detailing here, and it's really appreciated. For somebody who's coming in, looking at, who hasn't had a lot of time, a simple question I have is, we have these three small communities, and why is it that we don't have the upgrade done specifically for each community? Why does Bowen Bay have to be the one taking the brunt of that change? Or it seems to be, from what you're saying. Is that correct? Or
Well, there's a lot better well supply available in Bowen Bay than there is further north in Blue Water. There's, particularly if we upgrade the wells, there's far more supply from these wells than is needed to meet demand in the Bowen Bay system. So it's Bowen Bay's, Blue Water's paying for the improvements. Essentially, Bowen Bay would be getting access to a
water tank.
adequate sized reservoir at no cost. And it's not, it's not like this project is being done on the backs of the people from Bowen Bay. We're looking at, and really it doesn't make a lot of sense to have these three side-by-side systems. We have to look at what the overall needs are and how we can best meet that, how we can best achieve that.
yes, I would believe that's the interest here. What if each community had a way of managing their water in other ways? Has that been looked at specifically?
Yeah, we are looking at demand management strategies as well. And one of the big components of that has to do with the metering structure, so that it's more of a volumetric basis. You pay for the more you use. I mean, there's other, there may be, there may need to be some restrictions on development. There may be other demand. May be other ways to reduce demand. There's no way that the demand in blue water could be reduced anywhere near to what their wells are capable of supplying.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, thank you, because the idea of moving that much water from one location through is different than having each section properly set up for water, not necessarily with well, but with reservoir are actually enough and supportive enough that they can actually potentially hold what we're needing, because we live in a rainforest and there's many systems that are possible. So I just wonder whether other systems had been looked at, whether we had been included in those discussions, because it's a very important piece for us to be able to participate and to be comfortable with what you're talking about. So I'm thanking you. It's good that we know what you're doing and how you're doing it. It would be nice to be able to be included in those questions. Thank you.
there has been, well, over the past 2 years, there's been a fair bit of engagement with the water system, local advisory committees and communities. There is a substantial amount of information available on the water system pages on the website as well. If that's helpful for you.
Thank you.
Where was I? Okay, we were talking about
You're at next
the
step.
potential to install water main in the common. I mean, ultimately, if this community wants to improve the level of service, to have fire protection, the water mains will need to be replaced with larger mains. They will need to be replaced at some point in any case. We're suggesting that the community consider moving forward with this portion of that as the first phase of that water main upgrading project. And that's really, well, I did actually have another, I think I skipped over this slide. I think we've talked about the advantage of Bowen Bay being connected to a larger reservoir. We
I
had
have a
some
question. The Cove Bay tank that was put in last year or so, I don't know how many gallons, but I think it's probably in excess of 50,000. What did that cost?
That tank was part of the treatment plant project.
Yeah.
It was approximately 950,000, something like that.
And how big is that tank?
That tank is 2,000 cubic meters. So it's about 3.5 times the size of the King Edward Bay tank.
Okay, so like a 50,000 gallon tank would be about $400,000.
It would be more than that. It's not prorate. It's not a linear relationship.
Yeah. Okay, so let's say $500,000. That's the type of value that we can think about having the access to the King Edward Bay tank.
Yeah.
Well, we just for your reference, I mean, we just installed, well, it's nearly complete, a new reservoir tank for the Tunstall Bay water system.
Yes.
And that is similar size to the King Edward Bay tank, and total cost is in the neighborhood of 750,000.
Thank you very much. Good information.
We'd also talked, and we're still reviewing exactly how this is going to work. I just thought I would share some thoughts on how the operating costs would be handled. Essentially, a lot would remain unchanged in terms of, the BIM utility staff salaries and the vehicle cost, continue to be shared across all of the water systems, prorated based on number of connections. That's the way it currently works. The costs related to the distribution systems within a local service area would continue to be the responsibility of that local service area. The costs related to if there's a well such as the Blue Water Well 3 that supplies only one local service area, that would be responsibility of that service area. But the cost of the shared infrastructure, so essentially the municipal wells and fill lines and treatment facilities from Bowen Bay and King Edward Bay that supply water to the King Edward Bay tank, and then from there to the rest to all the systems would be shared across all the properties in the three systems, and that the King Edward Bay tank itself and the mains from the tank to the adjacent service areas. So that's essentially distributing the cost of the shared infrastructure across all the properties, which should be advantageous in that there's a lot of properties in Blue Water that would be sharing in those operation costs.
Patrick, Dennis has got his hand up.
Yeah.
And then Richard after Dennis.
Right. In terms of this costs related to operation, if and when we need a new well, how is that going to be allocated? Is that going to be shared? That cost going to be shared across all three systems?
That's right. Yeah. So, and it would be, prorated based on whether it's volumetric or per property. So if you've got, three quarters of the properties in Blue Water, then 3/4 of the cost of the well approximately would be paid by.
Yeah, that one sticks in my craw a little bit. I mean, because we have good wells and water that are more than adequate for us. But I understand the model, but I don't like it on that particular issue.
Thank you, Dennis. Richard, do you have a comment? And then
yeah, just a quick question for Graham. In your presentation, you were mentioning the Stewart well that's been recently drilled. Do you know what the flow rate is on that well?
I'm not sure. I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 gallons per minute.
I know Ian, and that's what he's indicated to me, that it's 10 to 12 gallons per minute, which is actually a very good flow rate. It's as good as our best well in Bowen Bay, well number 3. Ian spent $16,000 to drill that well. And it seems to me that that's, a very cost-effective way of getting, more water. Has any consideration been given to drilling in the northeast area of the Arbutus Ridge development, where there's water that pools at ground level? I'm relatively new and coming up to speed on this, but I just wonder how much exploration has been done in the Blue Water area to drill. If it costs $16,000 to drill a productive well, then why isn't that being given some consideration?
Well, it has been. I mean, you have to look at a better comparison would be the development of their Arbutus well. So it's not just drilling the well, the equipment and the treatment facilities and the mechanical and piping and the electrical and the controls. So that was a $500,000 project to install the Arbutus well, all in, right? So it's not just your $16,000 or $20,000 to get a drilling company to poke a hole in the ground. It's
but effectively that's what Ian's done, and it's a well producing 10 to 12 gallons per minute that could easily be tied into the King Edward Bay reservoir. It's closer than any of the Bowen Bay wells. Mm-hmm. That supply hasn't been factored into any of the study, I don't think. And to do that same thing, 400 meters on the other side of the Arbutus Ridge property, would cost a similar $16,000. Maybe it would yield nothing, but from what we know of the aquifer up there, chances are it would yield something. It would seem to be a pretty cost-effective way of increasing supply.
Yeah, I mean, we can explore for new wells. We expect that would be more costly ultimately to do that. And that's
but on that point, it's not $500,000 to drill a well. If the infrastructure, is there with the chlorination and everything else, it's just a matter of tying some pipe into, in the same way that we're looking at tying in the Bowen Bay wells. I just wonder how much consideration has been given to exploration for water. Closer to the blue water system.
Yeah. Well, I guess there hasn't been a lot of exploration work in the Menzies property area, which would be what the hydrogeologist recommended as an area that you might want to explore, as opposed to the blue water well field, which it doesn't really warrant trying to drill any additional wells up there, which is where the chlorination equipment and infrastructure is. And it's not, so I mean, there may be new wells needed, and there probably is good opportunity. I mean, I gave the example of Ian's well, and there could be good wells elsewhere as well. And so it's not like this is the end of the supply, what we have here. If we need to bring more supply online, we would invest in the exploration and development of the most promising sites.
Well, you've got an offer of one well that's producing as good as, if not better, than the Bowen Bay number 3 well that is in closer proximity to the King Edward Bay storage tank.
Yeah, and we are installing fill lines as the development proceeds. So they installed a fill line with the section of road that was done as phase 3. When the phase 4 road is built, they will include, that will be one of the requirements for the development to include the fill line there. And then in terms of the costs and how it's interconnected with the treatment facilities that we do have, or whether we need new treatment facilities, it is a source that we intend to pursue.
Right.
It's that the most cost-effective way to get sustainable supply in the short term is this approach of upgrading the existing wells that we have in Bowen Bay.
Well, we're not looking short term, we're looking long term, and we've got a well that's being offered that's closer to the reservoir, that's producing equivalent, if not more. And it would just seem to me obvious that, it would preclude the need for the Bowen Bay well number 3 to be tapped into. Anyway, those are my comments.
I don't know that we don't know that. And I would say it's, in terms of long term, it's probably we need to upgrade the Bowen Bay wells and pursue this additional opportunity and possibly others. I'm not saying that the Bowen Bay well upgrades is going to be all the water we'll ever need, right? I think we would also pursue the Stewart well as the Arbutus Ridge development builds out, and it's going to be more than one source of water that we'll need for the long term.
Thank you, Patrick. I think the O'Donnells are chomping at the bit.
Not chomping at the bit. I would just like to make the point, for those who aren't familiar with this and haven't been involved with it up to now, that in Bowen Bay there are 60 homes. In King Edward Bay there are 41 homes, and it's not finished being built. There will be more homes. And in Blue Water, there are 147 homes currently. So if we're taking wells that are supplying 60 people and have leftovers, and we're suddenly adding another 200 plus households to what's being served by that, I don't see how we have any guarantees. I totally agree with Richard's ideas of using the wells in Blue Water and in King Edward Bay to serve them. And the other point I'd like to make is that Blue Water has been paying King Edward Bay up to now to take water from them. And I'm not hearing any offers from them to take our water. So we're expected to be upgrading and paying some money of our own to upgrade our wells so we can give them our water. But King Edward Bay has been paid for their water.
That was a method of recovering operations costs. And what I proposed was another way of doing that, where the operations costs of operating those wells all get shared amongst all the properties. So, you know, you're only paying a fraction of what it costs to operate those wells.
Right.
And it's yeah, I mean, that's part of the issue is this, you know, it's our water sort of approach. It's
Well,
not your
So,
water.
if I could just interject, Lisa, hi, it's Kristen.
Hi.
Also, what's different in that scenario where Blue Water's paying for every gallon that they use, they had never contributed to the capital cost of any of that. So here in this model, the difference is that that Blue Water would be contributing money from their reserves or borrowing money from you know, and being paid for through their parcel taxes to pay for the capital cost of the significant capital upgrade that actually lives in the Bowen Bay district. So it's a bit of a different approach to try and share the cost because it takes that into account.
Okay, and then the other thing that I'm worried about with doing this is that if our supply isn't as good as we think it is, and by joining up to Blue Water, we start draining, and then suddenly we're all cut way back because there's not enough water. Is there an opportunity to change things back and have them separated so that we have enough water to service Bowen Bay?
No.
Well, we're also going to be pursuing other sources like the Stewart well that I mentioned and that Richard was talking about. And
Yeah.
We're confident in the capacity of, it's not just the Bowen Bay wells supplying everybody. There's substantial supply in King Edward Bay as well. The Arbutus Ridge well is a very productive well. And the others aren't too bad either in King Edward Bay. So we have a lot more supply going into a much larger reservoir. And so you're actually less vulnerable to issues than like you had this summer where one of your wells goes down, it's been prolonged dry period. I mean, if this was in place, you likely wouldn't have seen any water restrictions in this scenario that occurred this summer. Right.
King Edward Bay was put on restrictions because their well was running dry because Blue Water was using their water the summer before and last summer.
Yeah.
So maybe if Blue Water wasn't using their water then, or their well, then they wouldn't have been put on restrictions.
They wouldn't have. They wouldn't have.
So they're
but that's,
paying a price in another way for having their water used by another community that is way bigger than they are.
yeah, this is why we need more water. And it's looking at the overall balance of supply and demand. And with the additional supply from Bowen Bay, we have enough water for everybody. That's the key point. You know, and then the other point is that we will continue to look for and pursue additional sources to make sure we have enough for the long term.
Okay, and then who pays for that?
Well, if it would be the same sort of principle of if it's a shared resource, if we're bringing a new supply, say it costs, $600,000 to develop everything to get a new supply from the Stewart well into the King Edward Bay tank, that cost would be shared amongst all the properties throughout all the service areas. So you'd have approximately 75% of it paid from the Blue Water properties and whatever percentage from the other systems.
Per household.
Per household, or it could be, per volume that goes to each system. But some way of prorating it that way.
Thanks, Lisa. Dennis, did you want to?
Yeah, I think you're hearing a concern about, are we going to end up like King Edward Bay? I certainly have had that concern. So my question is, are you going to talk about what you're doing on the demand side? I mean, Lisa touched on it, but she actually missed a few things. In my mind, I don't think you mentioned Arbutus Ridge with, I think they have 25 lots there, plus some number of cottages. You got the Menzies property, which I don't know how many lots that's going to be. And then ignoring public input about infrastructure issues. Council passed this detached secondary house bylaw that's going to allow 1,550 square foot homes on any property on the island, nearly. So you got a lot of potential future demand that's going to be put on this system. And it seems to me like once we do this thing, it's done. And we're, like Lisa suggested, if we're sucking more water than we got, we're all going to be in phase 3 or phase 4 water restrictions. And that just doesn't, there was a comment or a line in that urban systems report talking about the financial solution, and it said it should be agreed to without restructuring existing LACs. The finance strategy needs to be prepared, and fairness will be a key principle. It just doesn't feel fair to me. And why the shift then to this different financial model for cost? And a kind of a corollary to that is that, I was on the LAC for 5 years, and we were constantly told that you could not commingle finances from one LAC to another. Yet that's exactly what this looks like. Is this even legal?
Yeah, we would have to do a transfer from Blue Water. Yeah, it does create challenges having the structure we have, but we're trying to find a way to be fair to everybody and not let this structure we have get in the way of implementing the best solution. So for the well upgrades, being paid by Blue Water, there would need to be a transfer of funds from that service area to the Bowen Bay service area, and then the money gets spent by the Bowen Bay service area. I think that's how that would work and be legal. And I don't know if Kristen if I said something that's not true, she can chime in.
No, that's my understanding. I mean, they're acquiring a service and they're paying for that service. So they're paying a fee to access some capital infrastructure. The infrastructure would still all technically be owned by the Bowen Bay. That's why we actually can't dissolve the local service areas, because we can't have a partial asset owned in 3 separate local service areas. It's got to be owned by one. So you're purchasing a service essentially.
But why not do that on the supply of water instead of like King Edward Bay is currently doing?
Because I think that it would take a lot longer for you to recover your investment in that. They would have to be purchasing water over a long period of time before you eventually recover that several $100,000 investment that you would have made. So we're saying, let's get the money up front to help offset the costs. You don't have enough money in your reserves to fund that investment.
Oh, so you're saying we would have to do all that capital investment?
If we didn't change the model into one where the costs, the initial upfront costs are shared. Yeah, exactly.
Does that work, Dennis?
Thank you.
Hello, I have a couple of questions here. It has been
Thanks, Jim.
stated that Blue Water would have to have a referendum to go to borrow the money. That's correct. Am I correct in that?
Mhm. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I haven't seen any referendum of Bowen Bay to agree to this.
Well, the referendum is needed to authorize the borrowing.
Yeah, to authorize the borrowing. So then Blue Water can authorize the borrowing, then they just walk in and do this on Bowen Bay.
Well,
And we don't have to have a referendum
we don't have to have a referendum. We're
because
seeking.
legally it's owned by the
The
island.
municipality.
And I
Right.
say to you all, this is really a politically stupid move.
Well,
Because if you don't ask the people here to agree to it, you'll be in a lot of trouble.
this is what we're doing here. This is
I also have another question. The Blue Water upgrade is about $30,000 per parcel of land. Am I correct?
The phase one is, I think, 1.6, Patrick.
No, overall it's 30,000, I think, for all of it. That includes upgrades of pumps, lines, and a new tank. And I look at just to upgrade our lines, it's $30,000 per parcel. So why are we getting charged a lot more money for a lot less service?
You're not. We use the same basic assumptions to come up with estimates for water main replacement costs in Blue Water as we did in Bowen Bay. We use the same unit rates for a per meter of 200 millimeter diameter water main. So it's not that it's a small system and you've got 60 properties and a fair amount of water main to replace, and that's what it works out to provide fire protection to the community. It's not based on any judgments or I don't really know what you're getting at, Jim.
Okay, all I'm saying is that, having lived in the community, I know the location of just about most of the properties, and it's not much different between the two communities. But maybe I'm wrong.
Dawn, do you have a comment?
Hi, yes, I do.
Okay.
Thank you. We've actually for a great public turnout tonight. I think we've got, 15 to 16 residents. I don't think this turnout is necessarily a plebiscite or community approval, whatever happens here, but it is great to see such a turnout. Just a couple of points. So, Patrick, in one point of the presentation, it was said that the cost-effective upgrade is to upgrade the Bowen Bay's wells. But I think you're hearing the sense that we might disagree. That Richard has brought up a great point. The easy picking is the Bowen Bay wells, but we're not. I don't think we're necessarily convinced that that's the most cost-effective thing. There's also the comment based on mitigating risks, i.e. going to our wells, which do seem to be performing well now. But, I guess I have a question, like well number one failed. Do we know why? Did the water get low and was it sucking in sediment or created other problems with the pump? Because, it arbitrarily failed near the end of a high use period. Perhaps you can answer that when I finish. And then one of the things I think we do have to all talk about is future needs. So I think there's still room for our communities to change. Bowen Bay, probably, I don't know, I haven't walked around and done a count, but we're probably only half of the properties have people full-time. It may even be less. And so once, of course, this may change over time and it's already changing. We're seeing more and more full-time people moving to Bowen, ourselves included. And I'm concerned that yes, we're doing well now, but once we have all our properties occupied 12 months a year, the consumption rate's going to jump. And what seems like great wells right now may not be so great. Then one of the comments in the presentation was that King Edward Bay wells can't meet the Blue Water Park demand. Well, I'm worried that in 5 more years, after all this change is done, we'll get the same headline that the Bowen Bay wells can't meet the Blue Water Park demand. And, we just don't know that. I mean, yes, we have studies, but certainly water availability is not an exact science. I'm also concerned we are embarking on a change where we're going from a relatively simple system without exotic interconnections. When you're spending $260,000 to put in 3 pumps with all interconnected electronics, etc., that's probably going to have a higher maintenance cost in the long run than putting in a $13,000 pump. So we're switching to a far more sophisticated era for Bowen Bay in order to meet the needs of the west side. But the concern is that the Bowen Bay people are going to bear a higher cost in the future. And then, finally, I don't think we have any interest in dissolving the Bowen Bay LAC. I mean, there's a comment, blending costs, spending, Blue Water Park spending money in Bowen Bay, how's that going to be done? And then, of course, also the great question is, okay, if we do blend and everyone becomes the same system, there's no longer local improvement districts, and it's done before Bowen Bay upgrades all their pipes to 6-inch. Does that mean all 3 water systems pay to upgrade our pipes to 6-inch? So I guess, there's 2 questions. Upgrading our pipes in the future, will that be borne by all 3 systems if we amalgamate? And why did our Bowen Bay well number 1 fail?
The Bowen Bay well number 1, we need to pull that to get to the bottom of what's occurred there. We did have an electrician and our own staff look into it. Without pulling the pump, we don't have the answer for you. And that's something that we have gotten a quote from Precision, and we'll hopefully get them out here soon to do that, and we'll be able to answer that question. And what was it seemed like you had a number of questions.
Yeah, well, two questions. That was question 1, thank you. And then the second question is, like Bowen Bay's pipes do need to be upgraded. We've all talked about that in many meetings, and we're probably 5 to 10 years behind Blue Water in terms of the pipes expiring. So, but one of the comments was made that I think by Kristen, but for financial reasons, if Blue Water is spending money in Bowen Bay, etc., that they need to blend all 3 systems into one local improvement district. And if that's done before we upgrade our pipes, does that mean the cost of upgrading the Bowen Bay pipes are shared by all 3 systems?
I'm sorry if I wasn't clear, John. What I said was that we would maintain the existing LACs, the local service areas, but what we would do would be to share the cost of capital improvement for the well infrastructure, for the things that relate to the supply of producing water. I'm sure you can appreciate that given the state of the distribution infrastructure in Blue Water Park, that we are not proposing that the 3 water systems would share in the cost of the maintenance and repair of that infrastructure. That was especially important to the members in King Edward Bay, where their pipes are in quite a newer state of repair and not going to require replacement for a good number of years. So no, we were suggesting that the costs of the water distribution system would remain with each local service area, given the disparity in the ages and conditions of that infrastructure.
Thank you, Kristen. Richards.
I just wanted to quickly add one thing anecdotally to John's concern about the Bowen Bay well number 1 running dry. Up Amelia Lane, Crow Lucas has a private well that used to run, it was an artesian well. It is no longer artesian, which would indicate a lowering of the overall water table. And that should be a concern to all of us. So I just want to interject that one point.
Okay, John, did you have?
Just to clarify, I don't believe that well number 1 ran dry, so to speak. I think there was a problem with the pump, most likely.
How old's that
John?
pump? How old's that pump?
It's probably about 50 years old.
15?
20.
20.
I don't know.
That's its life then, you know.
Yeah, that's right.
John, do you feel like your questions were answered? I also heard a few.
I'm fine for now, thank you.
I would just like to agree with Jim that I think we need to have everybody have a say, because there are a lot of people who live in Bowen Bay who are not present tonight and may not have a full understanding of this whole change. And I think we need to make sure that everybody in Bowen Bay is aware and has a say.
Thank you, Dennis.
My question relates to latecomers to the system, and how are they being charged, and how will those monies be shared across the system? Yeah, let's leave it right there for the moment.
Well, any properties joining a local area service have to contribute to the infrastructure that they'll be now benefiting from. So, and there's a formula for determining that. It's essentially based on, the total value of the infrastructure, less debt in the system divided by the number of properties.
So that'll be kept within each LAC, is that what you're saying?
That would be the current structure until that's changed.
Sorry, just for clear.
I'm sorry, who was?
It was staff. I just want to be clear for the public, and that when we're saying it's LSA, it's a local service area. It's the infrastructure. The LAC is the group of people.
Gotcha.
Just for the public. Thanks.
I've been saying local area service because that's actually how it's defined in the legislation. So,
okay, LAS.
I'm not the only one that's wrong.
Yeah.
No, we've been all doing it all night, so just LAS then. The S is it. Mm-hmm.
So in the urban systems report from last winter, they had a chart showing capital costs for independent systems with a near new well term, I can't do it, new near term well supply. And they had a cost associated with that of $718 to $1.795 million. Okay, I presume that's if you add a new well, that's what that's going to be worth, or what it costs, capital cost.
Yeah.
So we have an asset. I know the water doesn't belong to us, but don't the wells belong to the Bowen Bay LSA?
Yeah,
Well, they're all
they're all
municipal.
municipal,
assets.
right? But
They're all municipal.
they are, yeah, they are assets of that local area.
All right, okay. So should we not be compensated in some fashion for sharing that asset with Blue Water Park and even possibly King Edward Bay?
Well, I guess if you were to carry that on, then, you know, you'd be benefiting from a large reservoir tank that this area service didn't contribute to, and should you not be contributing to that infrastructure? Right, it's and you know,
Yeah, but we're not given that option of not doing that, right?
well, I mean, you could, if you want to ultimately have, you know, the level of service that provides fire protection, and you were to build your own reservoir, that would be a big cost shared amongst the 60 properties in Bowen Bay. You know, and yeah, so it's I get your point though. I mean, you have this value. You know, you don't really realize the full potential of it until mains are upgraded, but it's still a value. It's not, there's value. It's not a plan that doesn't provide value to everybody. Like there is a.
I understand that, but you know, I also have a little different, probably an outlier's view on the fire protection issue with volunteer. You know, I've mentioned this before with volunteer fire department, the best you can expect. And I've gotten this response from 2 fire chiefs is that if your neighbor's house catches on fire, yours may not.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. So does anybody else have any questions for Patrick? Are we done? Okay. Kristen.
Thank
Kristen.
you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. The second part of our information meeting tonight relates to the proposal of the implementation of metered rate billing in Bowen Bay. So following up from our discussion in the meeting in July, I produced a schedule to show how that proposed metered rate would pan out. So everyone has the ability to go to the analysis and look up their account number and see exactly how that would impact their costs given their exact usage under that proposed metered rate billing structure. So I think it was a really valuable exercise to undertake. It proved that winter usage is significantly lower in Bowen Bay than summer, probably even more so than I had anticipated in my initial assumptions. It showed that the rate still needs a bit of tweaking because in order to generate the necessary revenue in the Bowen Bay local service area, we'll need to increase both the fixed component and the metered rate component. The structure of the bill is such that 75% of revenue is generated through the fixed component and 25% of the revenue generated through the metered rate piece. So in order to move forward with billing for the 2022 fiscal year, we're just gonna go forward with the same flat rate structure that the essentially flat rate structure that we have in Bowen Bay. And that will require that we increase the rates in the district from $9.60 for the connected properties to $10.85. And that we increase the unconnected property from $600 to $675. And that will ensure that we meet the budget revenue target, and that budget revenue target was approved at our budget meeting back in April. So later on tonight in the LAC meeting, we'll be asking the committee to recommend that council direct staff to approve an amendment to the rate bylaw that incorporates those two new flat rates. And we'll be sending out the bills once that bylaw then is approved. You can expect that we'll send out the bills for Bowen Bay very soon after, which would probably be about November 29th. So I apologize for the delay in the bills this year, but we just had to finalize that flat rate structure. Now moving forward with the metered rate, again, just this is coming from direction from council. Council recognizes that the climate change is impacting water supplies all over the world, really. And in order to affect change and influence demand, they're looking for us to do a revision to the rate bylaws across the island. So this is the same exact process that we went through in Blue Water, in King Edward Bay, and now we're bringing it to Bowen Bay. The plan moving forward with this is to do some tweaking on the rates. As I mentioned, we need to increase the flat rate piece as well as increase the metered rate piece in order to make sure that we don't shortchange the budget target revenue when moving to a metered rate bylaw. So we'll do that work over the next few weeks and bring back a new draft proposed metered rate bylaw to the LAC committee in January. In the meantime, I invite everybody to look to the analysis. Just have a look. I think it's interesting where you can see that your usage and how this metered rate bylaw could be expected to impact you and your own bill. There's some winners and there's some losers. Overall, I think a lot of people will end up paying very close or very, very much the same to what they're paying under the flat rate. And I think it's great for us to move to that metered rate billing throughout the year so we can do things like capture leaks that happen in the wintertime. And there's one really good example. If you look at the data, there's one really good example where—
Do you want me to show it? Just share the screen, Kristen?
Sure, yeah, that would be great.
So it's item 3?
Yeah, thanks. And it's in the green section. Account 962 there.
Sorry.
That's Blue Water Park stuff.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks.
While she's doing that, how do we find our account number?
We'll have it'll be on your water bill, or if you want to give me a call, I'm happy to just quickly look at it for you.
I just need to dig up my water bill, I guess. Thank you.
Yeah, or if you want, just call me, I'll tell you. There's one account there that's consumption in the quarter was over 180,000 gallons. So because it happened in the winter, it was missed. You know, we weren't able to really react to that or pick it up. So I think moving towards this full year model of reading the meters is really going to be a positive thing. So I'm happy to take your questions or comments about it. Anything else you'd like us to capture in the minutes and bring forward to council is appreciated.
There you go. Sorry about that.
Yeah, it was account 962. And I should have sorted these. I'm sorry.
Okay.
They're in.
Can I do a find?
It's just in the middle there, 962. It's right in the middle in the second group of readings. Move to the right. Move to the right.
Okay, I've got it. Okay, I've got it in 2 places then. Here.
It's that whole line. The second section is the quarter from January to March, and you can see the usage over that period, 180,000 gallons, which is exorbitant. That's over 3,000 gallons a day. Oh, sorry, that's what their bill would have been for that period. I had the daily usage on another sheet.
Kristen, what is the number of gallons per day per household allowance if you are to stay at the base rate and not be charged anything additional?
I believe currently it is it based on 220 a day? I'll have to look up the existing rate. I'm sorry. If
And
you
is
wanna-
that rate changing? Is that
Yeah,
changing?
this structure is such that in order to help change that, we want to change the mindset. We want to, every gallon is charged, it's charged at very low rates right from the beginning. So there's a fixed flat rate piece and then a cost associated with every gallon. And it's based on a structure where 2,000 gallons is charged at the lowest rate, and then anything over 9,000 gallons is charged at the highest rate. So it's a incline scale over the a progressively increased consumption.
So 2,000 gallons per
2,000 gallons per quarter is charged at the very lowest rate.
per day? No, that's not per day.
So
Per month?
quarter, so
Per
quarter,
quarter.
so 3
Per
months.
quarter.
Yeah.
2,000 gallons. Okay.
Yeah.
David?
Oh, thank you. Kristen, could you repeat, please, where we go to look that up with our account number?
Steph will put the document on the webpage, on the Bowen Bay webpage, on the municipal website.
Oh.
It's also included in the material for this meeting, in the agenda material. You'll be able
Okay.
to look it up there. And if you don't know what your account number is, then please feel free to call me or email me.
Right. Thank you very much.
Kristen, my math may be wrong here. 2,000 gallons per quarter divided by 90 is 22 gallons per day. What am I missing here?
Nothing. I don't.
Kristen, I just looked up the old bylaw
Yeah.
and it was 7,200 imperial gallons per month
Okay.
Per month. Okay.
as measured by meter between June and September. That's when the over rates were coming in.
That's the old bylaw, the
Yeah.
existing bylaw.
That was bylaw number 540, 2021.
Thank you. So I will just go over, I've just broken out what the progressive rate structure is. So the first cutoff, and I'm sorry, I said 2,000, I was wrong. It's 4,500, and that's charged at 0.005 cents per gallon. The next cutoff is 2,500, and the next 2,500 gallons were charged at 0.0075. The next cutoff is 2,000, and that is charged at 0.0125, and everything over that is charged at 2 cents. So under that structure, this material, this data that is part of the agenda package tonight has been recalculated to show, based on those quarterly consumption numbers, those are those quarterly bill amounts are what you could expect based on that quarterly consumption.
There's a lot of numbers there, but essentially 4,500 per quarter is 1,500 per month, correct?
Correct.
And so what Allison just read out from the current bylaws is we're allowed 7,200 gallons per month. You're proposing 1,500 gallons per month.
Well, I don't like the language that you're allowed. There's no free, there's no cost-free threshold under this model. Every gallon is charged from the first gallon.
Okay, but I'm trying to equate
just a
it to what we're
different
currently
way.
paying for a flat rate.
It's
So
a different way of charging for water, saying that every gallon should be paid for under a metered rate structure, as opposed to having a monthly free allowance that some people may use it all, many people do not.
so for people that have been using 7,200 gallons per month historically, what will the new rate work out to under your proposed billing schedule?
I'd have to do some calculations. I don't think I can do it on the fly that quickly, but because 7,200 is on a monthly basis you're asking, and this model is on a quarterly basis. So if you want to put those questions in writing to me, I'll rerun the numbers for you and send it to you. And again, we can share that on the website. Steph, I can ask you to put anything up.
I'm just trying to wrap my mind around whether this is a 50% increase to the average user or a 10% increase or a possible decrease. Anyway, I guess we'll have to do some number crunching.
Well, Richard, I think if you look at the sheets, very few people use the full amount, right, Kristen? I mean, if you're looking at the spreadsheets you had, you've listed what their quarterly consumption is. So
Yeah.
if you divide by 4, I mean, the highest one,
Or by 3.
or by 3, sorry. Yeah.
There aren't that many people who are,
yeah. So 21,000 divided by 3 is, close to 7 something.
Yeah.
So that's the closest one that would give you a comparison.
Yeah. The last column on the worksheet is the total of the proposed 4 quarters. And knowing that the expected rate this year is going to be 1,085. There's probably about 20, maybe 15 accounts that are higher than that, and everybody else is lower than that. This rate needs to come up. It needs to be increased a little bit in order to ensure that we make that budgeted revenue target of 66,300. I think under this model, this would likely have generated about 60,000 in revenue. So that does need to come up a little bit. And that's the work that I'm going to be undertaking in the next couple of weeks and come forth again with that in January. So any specific questions, Richard, please send them to me, and I'm happy to run some additional numbers for you and respond to you directly and share that information to the broader group as well.
I just popped into the chat Kristen's email address. Thanks. And the link to this page of all the potential bills under the new rate, and to the Bowen Bay Water System Local Advisory Committee webpage, where that is now posted. So all those links are in the chat for those of you who don't have an agenda. John O'Donnell.
Thank you, Steph. We're embarking on a different, I guess, path as mandated by Metro Vancouver and various councils, asking us to try and reduce our water consumption. I guess it's a lot like a carbon tax, which we can all debate the effectiveness of. But I think one thing we have to step back and examine for a moment is the trends in property taxes today. So the trend seems to be trying to tax properties that are not used as effectively as properties that are used full time. We're seeing that in a lot of communities. They're trying to get properties to be used full time. And so they're giving differential tax rates considerations. Whereas I find this is going the opposite direction. So this is saying those of us in Bowen Bay that live here full time and might actually flush our toilets year round would be asked to pay higher water rates than those that are, fortunate to still have a home elsewhere and live here maybe a couple of months a year. So, I just question it, and it will come to this later in the LAC meeting, but right now, Bowen Bay, of course, does not have an issue. We may, I think we had said last year, and we'll go into this later, but this is to be visited at some later time when we might have an issue with the amount of water being used. I think and then yes, I guess we'd have to ask ourselves, and maybe you've got some data, is the average consumption use in Bowen Bay, is it less than Blue Water Park? Is it the same or more than Blue Water Park, or is it because Blue Water Park has the issue, we don't? And then I guess the other thing is there's other water systems on Bowen Island, Miller's Landing, or around the island are they all going on the same system? You're saying it's island wide. I kind of question that, right? We all have different needs and requirements. So, you know, I know, you know, you brought this up last year, and it's been on the table for a while. You know, this stepped rate. But you know, I think last year we said the same thing. We didn't see the need. Then a question I have, which you probably have the answer for, is right now we get one bill per year.
Mhm.
And you know, the meters are red in the summer. So what is the extra cost of the extra bills? We're being billed quarterly, so I presume that's 3 more bills per year.
Mhm.
Just to print, you know, well, to go through journal entries and do everything, send email, collect the checks. You know, how much per household is that? Because that's going to be added through the municipal accounting of allocating costs of the municipality to our annual water cost. So, you know, we're going to be paying more just for this fancy billing system when we don't have a water problem.
Yeah, I hadn't, I don't anticipate that we would be allocating any greater share of administrative time to water districts. Again, we don't, we distribute administrative time based on the number of connections per system. What made difference is that there could be expected additional postage. So for a water system with 60 people in it, then we'd be sending you 4 bills a year instead of 1. So yeah, you perhaps could expect a couple $100 more a year in postage.
But you know, you've got the cost of producing the letters, printing them, putting them in envelopes, and then receiving the check, posting the checks.
Yeah, that's all covered off in the administrative distribution of finance staff labor to the utilities. And it's again, it's done by number of connections. So Cove Bay takes 50% of all of that. And the rest of it is spread pro rata among the other water systems based on the number of connections. We can't, there's no way we could ever open up a piece of mail and say, oh, this is a Bowen Bay check. Okay, we'll track that time to Bowen Bay. That's just not something you do.
The point is there's going to be at least $10 per connection cost to someone for these extra 3 bills per year. Just the processing, handling. I mean, you know, and so that, you know, that's per connection. So that's an extra $30 per connection.
I think it comes down to postage and a piece anything, and I just
well, anyway,
I don't think it's
as the accountant,
egregious as you think.
Yeah, those things don't cost anything, then great. But okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, John. Does anyone have any more questions regarding this metered rate system for our CFO? Hearing none. Richard?
Oh, sorry, no, nothing.
Okay, I think we are half an hour over time. I think we're ready to close this out and head into the local advisory committee meeting. People are welcome to shift over to watch on YouTube. I can put that in the chat as well, or you can stay online as you are now. But I'm going to stop the recording and give people a chance to take a quick break and then start again. Okay, thank you very much for coming out, everybody. Thanks so much.